In this video, we're going to hike up to an old mine site. And this mine site's kind of unusual. It's what you might call an enigma. And we're going to take a look at all the clues we can find. And we're going to try to figure out what these old timers were up to. And then at the end of the video, we're going to take a look at some of the ore that was coming out of this mine. Right here, we have the old stamp mill. And so this is always a good sign when you find one of these, because that means the mine produced enough gold and silver to justify the expense of building one of these. And this is an old technology. It dates back to the 16th century in Europe. And back then they would have used a water wheel to power it. But when this one was in operation, they would have had a wood-fired boiler, and this wood-fired boiler would have produced steam. And that steam would have turned a steam engine. And then the steam engine would have a set of pulleys on it, which would be attached to the stamp. And the stamp would have been about right in this area. And how the stamp worked is you had a camshaft, and attached to the camshaft you had these rods. And at the end of the rods you had what was called shoes. And the shoes would just pulverize and crush the ore. And then after you crush the ore, depending on the type of ore you have, there's different processes involved. You could use, you might have to roast the ore. You use mercury to separate the gold, or they had different types of chemicals. In this case, in a stamp like this, you would most definitely, they were probably using mercury. Our boiler, our steam engine, the stamp itself is all gone. And that could have been because collectors came in here and salvaged everything, or it might have been the Forest Service at one time, made some kind of attempt to clean it up. But I don't think it was any of those reasons, and I'll give you my theory at the end of the video. But we'll make this our first clue. So our first clue is that they had a really good mine, they had really good ore, and they expected to be here for the long run, long enough to justify building this stamp mill. Right here on the ground in front of us, we have just tons of white quartz. What a lot of people call bull quartz. It's everywhere, just scattered all across here. And when you're out hiking around or messing around, you'll come across this stuff a lot. And sometimes it's hard to identify because you have quartz, calcite, feldspar. All three are very common minerals. And all three, to the naked eye, look very similar many times. And so an easy way that you can identify it is calcite's the easiest. And calcite is a carbonate mineral. And so if you put like a mild acid on it, like a hydrochloric acid or vinegar or something like that, you'll get a reaction. So you'll get a fizz. But if you're like me, and you're out exploring around and stuff, I don't want to be packing acid or vinegar in my backpack all day. An easier way is just to do a simple scratch test. Calcite is a very soft mineral. On the hardness scale, it's a 3. So if you have a penny is usually right around like 3.5 on the hardness scale. So penny will scratch calcite. But I just carry a pocket knife, and if you pull out your pocket knife and you start scratching on it, and if it scratches really easily, then more than likely you're probably dealing with calcite. Feldspar and quartz, that's a little harder. They're both about the same hardness. Feldspar is 6, and if I remember right, I think quartz is 7. But feldspar, when you break it, you'll have a cleavage plane, where quartz you will not. And also on feldspar, and there's different types of feldspar, but you'll get a lot of striations, like these parallel striations, or you might get these wavy lines that kind of looks like grains of wood. But that's usually just some simple tests that you can do out here, just using your pocket knife and your loop to be able to tell the difference between calcite, feldspar, and quartz. And so all of this white quartz, Now, this stuff is worthless. Now, this will have some impurities in it, but for the most part, this is just it's 2 parts oxygen, 1 part silicon, so it's silicon dioxide. And so this had no value to those old timers. They were not interested in this stuff. And so right here, you have this major blast site. They blasted all of this with dynamite. You can see where they cut out this big section. And what they were doing is they were blasting into this quartz vein. You got a big quartz vein. It runs right there. And this quartz vein runs all the way up the mountain from us. And there's 5 more outcroppings after this as you head up towards the mine. And this is all the same vein. It just runs all the way up the side of the mountain to the mine. And so we'll make this our second clue. For some odd reason, these old timers were very interested in this outcropping of white quartz. Not just this one, but the 5 other ones. They blasted into all 5. I'm not going to show you the other 5, but they look very similar to this. This is the biggest one. The other ones are just a little bit smaller, but all 5 of them, they blasted into that worthless white quartz. Now, we got a gorgeous day today and $1 million views. Just the perfect day to come out and do something like this. But this path, this trail that I'm following, this was built by the old miners, and this will take you straight to the old mine. And this might not look like much, but trust me, man, this is a really good trail. I've seen far worse than this. They made it nice and wide, and for the most part, it has a nice grade as it zigzags up and down the mountain. And they built this because they would have had mules, more than likely mules, possibly horses. But these mules would have been carrying these carts, and these carts would have been full of ore and waste rock and different supplies and stuff like that that the miners needed. And so these mules would be going up and down the mountain, pulling their carts on this path all day long. And speaking of animals, they used to use usually mules, but also horses down in old mines. Not in mines like this. You don't hear that a lot in these Western gold and silver mines, but it's usually in Europe, Australia, and the United States, and typically in old coal mines. But these mules, these horses, they were called pit ponies, and they were taken very good care of. You know, of course, you had accidents and some of them died, no different than the miners, but the miners babied them. They were well fed, well taken care of. But of course, nowadays, you know, you don't use horses and mules down the old mines. But just a part of history that a lot of people don't know about is back in the olden days, it was very common to find horses and mules, especially in the coal mines, way down deep in the earth, working side by side with the human miners. And we're going to call this trail, this path, this is going to be clue number 3. So those guys built this, and they spent a lot of time on it. There's even areas where they rocked up sides of the trail. So they were expecting to be here for the long haul. That's why they built this nice trail, this nice path. So, you know, this wasn't no exploratory hole. They plan on being here and mining for a long time. All right, we finally made it. We are at the old mine site, and the mine is just right here around the corner. We're gonna go take a look at it here in just a second. But I want to show you something that's really cool before we head in there. This right here, this is where those old timers blasted out the rock. And you kind of see where it used to go up like that, and they just blasted out this whole rock face. But what makes this neat is you can still see the old core hole they drilled where they placed the dynamite. And most of these holes, they did not survive. They would cut out these holes, then they'd put their dynamite in there and the dynamite would go off. And during the explosion, you know, of course, these holes would, for the most part, be destroyed. But this one's really intact and it's really cool. You can see all the old lichen growing up inside of it, but really neat. And you hardly ever find these intact like this, or at least I don't. And speaking of dynamite, dynamite revolutionized mining. Prior to dynamite, they used black powder, and dynamite was 5 times more powerful than black powder. And it was invented by a man by the name of Alfred Nobel in 1866. And Alfred was a Swedish chemist, a very brilliant man, a very good man. And he invented dynamite because he had the best of intentions. And he wanted dynamite to be used in areas like this, you know, to help out miners and make their jobs easier, in the construction industry, to help out farmers, you know, if they want to like uproot a tree stump and stuff like that. But of course, you know how things are, and people took his invention and they weaponized it. And Alfred didn't want his legacy destroyed like that. And so what Alfred did is he created what was called the Nobel Institute, and he ended up donating his entire fortune to this institute. And every year, the Nobel Institute picks 5 people from around the world, and 5 people who have did the most to like benefit humanity. They did the most to benefit civilization. And they award these 5 individuals with prizes. And this is where you get your Nobel Peace Prize from. But this shaft right here, this doesn't go down very far. It only goes back in there about 15 feet and dead ends. There's really nothing to see in here. But another thing I wanted to point out is, see how the adit right here, the entrance is just being filled in with all this sediment. And you have this erosion where the sediment's coming down and it's just slowly filling this in. And so every year, you know, when you get your snow melt or during heavy rainstorms, this just fills in little by little by little by little. And I imagine in 100 years, probably not even that long, probably like 75 more years, you could walk right by this and you wouldn't even know this was here. And I find stuff like this all the time. And the reason I bring that up is because, all right, so you got these old legends. Like I was born and raised in Utah, and you have like the Lost Roads Mine, or people down in Arizona, they have the Lost Dutchman's Mine, and you have all these old mines and stories, right? And it's a lot of fun to go out looking for them, and there's definitely no harm in that. But these mines, they're very old, and they usually date back to the Spanish. And I think, you know, there's been like untold thousands of people over the years who have been searching for these mines, and of course nobody ever finds them. And I think this is the reason why, you know, they've just been sealed off by Mother Nature. They're just completely filled in. You could walk right next to it, you could stand right on top of it, and you wouldn't even know it. Just something to think about when you're out exploring and searching for your favorite lost mine. All right, here she is. And this thing is massive. Just a gigantic cavity. And this was not like a big vug or something like that. If it was, you know, it'd be famous or at least well documented. You know, so it's nothing like that. This is just an obscure mine. But look at it. This is not natural. This is all blasted out. And then hopefully the camera's picking it up good. Down here, you have some, looks like probably some kids that have hiked up in here partying. And I don't fault them for partying. Man, we were all young and dumb once, right? But that's just nasty, leaving all their garbage. I hate it when people do that. There's no excuse for that. But here she is in all her glory. it's kind of hard just to capture everything. It's so massive. And then this is just an exit that they blasted through right here. I'll stand over here and maybe I can get a better view of it all. All right, so when I first found this, and man, I was looking at the hanging wall and the foot wall and the wall rock, and you know, there's no mineralization. And so, you know, I was stumped. I'm like, you know, what were these old guys doing, man? They're up here. What did they blast this out for? But lucky for us, Mother Nature has left a clue for us. And this slab of rock right here, this came from way up there, right there. And this would have fallen off sometime long after the mine. You know, for all I know, it fell off last winter, or it might have been 80 years ago, who knows. But this is the vein they were chasing, I'm almost positive. So I'm gonna grab a piece and we're gonna go outside and take a look, and we'll call this our fourth and final clue, the ore. All right, this type of rock, this is called schist. And schist is very foliated, and foliated meaning it'll break apart in like layers or sheets. And schist is identified by the type of mineral that it contains. So for example, this has a lot of biotite. So at one point in time, this would have been called biotite schist. But what happened to this is when this was very deep down in the earth, it went through alterations, and it was subjected to a lot of heat, a lot of pressure, and hydrothermal fluids. And the hydrothermal fluids is where you get all these quartz veins running through it. And this altered the rock. And this type of schist is a lot more harder than normal schist. That's why I can sit here and I can handle it and flip it. Normal schist, you know, would be breaking apart. But this rock would now be called quartz bionite kyanite schist. And that's quite a mouthful, right? So from here on out, we're just gonna call it simply schist. But you'll see all of these reds and brown and tan and all these beautiful colors that you have in here. These are the colors that those old timers were looking for when they're looking for gold and silver. And all this coloration, this is usually a good indication of mineralization. And in this case, it would have been a lot of different sulfide type minerals. But a very beautiful rock. And so now, all right, so now we have all these clues. We have some little pieces of a puzzle. So let's put everything together and see if we can get a more clear picture of what took place here. All right, we're going to say it's the late 1800s, and we have our old prospector, and we're going to have some fun, and we're going to give him a name, and we're going to call him Jedediah. And everything we're talking about, of course, this is just pure speculation, so we'll take it for what it's worth. We'll never truly know what happened at a place like this. But Jedediah, he's a very good prospector. He's been around for a long time. He's always been able to find gold. He's always been able to eke out a living. But he's getting up there in age. He's not getting any younger, and he knows it. And he needs to find something more secure to sustain him during his old age, because it's beginning to be too much for Jedediah, hiking up and down mountains, panning golds out of the stream. And the gold is beginning to get harder and harder to find. And so Jedediah, he's searching new areas, and he's in this area where we're at right now. And he starts to find this float, this quartz float, and he starts to follow it up the mountain. And he's looking at it, and there's a little bit of color. He's finding some pyrite, stuff like that, but nothing too interesting. And so he keeps following this quartz vein up the mountain, and he starts coming to these outcroppings, one after another, until he finally arrives to where we are right now. All right, so our friend Jedediah, he follows the quartz vein all the way up the mountain, and he comes to this right here, and this is the last outcropping of the quartz. There's no more quartz up above here, or at least no more outcroppings. So he's looking around, and he's looking for mineralization, and he looks over here on these rocks, on this cliff, and right up here, right up near the top, there's an outcropping of that rich schist rock, and it looks good. It has all the right colors, and it looks like it's heavily mineralized, and you know, it might contain some gold, some silver. And so Jedediah, he takes out some random samples and he has them assayed, and they come back with very high concentrations of gold and silver. And with these assays, Jedediah is able to attract attention of investors to where he can get the money that he needs to come up here and start hard rock mining. All right, we know the original vein was up here high, and we know that because of that piece of slab that fell off. So I think the original adit, the opening of the mine, was probably like right in here. And so they blasted in, they just started drifting across, following the vein. And they drifted clear over to right here in the middle somewhere, just cleaning everything out. Now remember, they think the ore body goes deep into the earth. And the reason we know that is because they built a stamp mill. They were expecting to chase this ore for a long time. And so what they do is they sink their vertical shaft, and they start coming down, 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 and then boom, right in here, the ore runs out, and you just start getting all of this worthless rock. And so now you can just hear the cuss words flying out of Jedediah's mouth. It wasn't supposed to happen, not like this. This wasn't part of the plan. And so they're starting to panic a little bit. And so they start exploring out from their shaft, and maybe they start doing a little bit of stoping and kind of going this way and this way, just trying to figure out which direction the ore body took. Now, all hope is not lost, because it might just dip down at a different angle. You know, it might dip like that into the earth, and maybe they just missed it, maybe just by 10 feet. So they think about it and think about it, and then they decide that the best thing to do is to open all of this up right here. And that's why you have this long, very elongated opening. And then this allows them to come in here and just remove everything, basically gut this place, just trying to figure out which direction the vein was headed in. But unfortunately for them, this was it. There was no more. So this ore, it's probably very rich. You know, it probably assayed very good, or he wouldn't have been able to get the capital he needed to do all this. But unfortunately for them, it was just a very rich but very shallow just pocket of ore, and that's all it was. So you can just imagine the dilemma that Jedediah would find himself in. And just to put things in perspective, I was trying to do research on how much did those old timers pay for those stamp mills back then. And I couldn't really find any solid information, but I did find an article. And in 1910, there was a mine, and this mine was in Arizona, so it wasn't like in Alaska or something like that where they had all this, shipping cost and all that involved. This is in Arizona. But in 1910, the miners bought a stamp mill, and it was a 10 stamp mill. And so they paid $20,000. So what I did is I took $20,000 and divided it by the number of stamps, and that comes to $2,000 per stamp. And that's the best I could do with the limited information that I had. And so this mine right here, this would not have been a 10 stamp mill. This would have been something fairly small, probably like a 2 or 3 stamp mill. And so using that, we could say like a 2 stamp mill would cost you $4,000, and a 3 stamp mill would cost you $6,000. So what I did is I averaged it out to $5,000. And to put that in perspective, adjusting for inflation using today's dollars, $5,000 back then would be the equivalent of $165,000 in today's money. And so back then, gold had a fixed price. It was fixed in at $20.67 per ounce. And so if they paid $5,000 for that stamp mill, they would have to recover around 241 ounces of gold just to pay for the initial cost of the stamp mill, not counting all the other costs associated with hard rock mining. And so you can kind of see the predicament that Jedediah would find himself in. But Jedediah is not a quitter, right? And he's not ready to give up, not yet. So inside this cavity that we're in right now, that quartz vein that runs all the way up the mountain, it ran through this cavity, and you can still see some of it even now. But the reason I know it was in here is because the waste rock, all the waste rock they pulled out of here, they took just a little ways down the trail, and they just kind of dumped it over the trail on the side of the mountain. And that was very common back then. You know, you didn't have an EPA or anything like that. So, and when you dig through all that waste rock, there's just tons, big old chunks of that white quartz. So I don't know how everything was oriented, but I do know for sure that the white quartz and this schist were in here together. So Jedediah, he's not done yet. He remembers all those outcroppings of the same white quartz down off the mountain from where we are now. So he starts going down and he starts blasting into this white quartz, just hoping he can find another exposure of this rich schist rock. So he starts blasting into them one after another, after another, after another, until you get to the very last one, which is the one we looked at the beginning of this video. And unfortunately for Jedediah, there was no more rich schist. That was it. So at this point in time, Jedediah is probably bankrupt, and he has no option left but to start liquidating all of the assets. That's why you don't have your steam boiler. That's why you don't have your steam engine. That's why you don't have the stamp mill. Anything of value was sold off to pay the creditors. You know, I read a book not too long ago, and it was just a book on mining history and stuff like that. But in this book, this lady, she worked for the Forest Service, and the author was interviewing her. And one of her responsibilities was she would go around to old mine sites and seal them to, you know, close them up for public safety. And it's kind of interesting, but she'd use some kind of foam. I can't remember what she called it, but she'd inject this foam into the entrance of the mine, and it would just expand and seal everything up. But anyways, she said that I guess being the Forest Service, they estimated that back in the olden days, there were tens of thousands of mines and diggings that were created, and that includes Alaska. They honestly don't have a clue, because most of the old mines weren't documented, or they've just been lost to history. So, but you have these tens of thousands of old mines, just like this one. This would be one of those. And we always hear of the bonanzas, you know, these super rich mines like in Virginia City or Cripple Creek or Park City and stuff like that. But the truth is, the reality, most of your old mines, or a good percentage of them, ended in failure for one reason or another. They just were not profitable. And this mine is a good example of that. And Jedediah's folly was he kind of put the cart before the horse. He started investing in the mill, the trail, and all this infrastructure before the mine had time to prove itself. But it's a very cool site. It's very interesting. It's part of our history. And so I hope you enjoyed it. And as always, thanks for watching, and until next time.